Well, welcome to Small Town Times. We got a special episode today. We're going to talk about housing. Special guest today are former Councillor Dave Mendocino and former Mayor Al McDonald. We're going to try to look at what the lay of the land is here in North Bay as far as what housing needs are and what are the impediments and possible solution to increase the number of homes available for people at the different levels. So I'm going to start it off. Guys, thank you very much for coming. You're officially between two Daves right now?
Yeah, I feel like a Dave sandwich.
Yeah, well, we'll figure out whether that's peanut butter in the middle or meat, right?
Well, it is McDonald's.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, there you go.
Is there meat in McDonald's? Okay, we won't go there.
I think David Letterman got sued for saying that.
Yeah, well, he can afford it. Dave, I want to start with you and give us a little thought about what you think is going on. You were involved with DSAB as an elected official, and you have some notes here. So start it off with a little bit of a shot of what you think is happening.
Well, just a general overview. I'm very excited about where the city's positioned right now with respect to new housing. I mean, this is work that's been done certainly by this council, but it was started by the last term of council. That 4 years of growth really started the process of looking at our planning policies and looking at the ways that we approve development.
What do you mean by positioned?
Well, first off, the planning staff. It was the last council really got into this concept of changing planning policies and with respect to how do we make it more easy to develop? How do we provide some incentives to develop? The Growth Community Improvement Plan was started. We saw a lot of success from that in terms of new housing and the employment it created. You've got DSAB that over the last 4 years, we sold off two big chunks of property that Nipissing District Housing Corp, which is the arm of DSAB, owned. But that money could be used elsewhere. So we sold the walkway for $1.1 million. We sold Dr. Carruthers School off of Brook Street for $3-point-something million. DSAB is sitting on a very significant surplus right now. And when you see the feds offering the Housing Accelerator Fund, offering $4 billion Canada-wide, when I say we're well positioned, between the surpluses we've created, between the policies that have been developed over the last few years at the city to be pro-development, I think we're well positioned to take advantage of this funding to help accelerate, really, the building of units.
Al, is that your view as well?
Absolutely. I think we're well positioned, and it goes back probably 6 years now. And a lot of times it's just little changes to improve the process. It's not rocket science. It's just, learning the levers of power, right? Just, what you can and can't do. And a lot of time you just can't do things. But, the simple little things. So I remembered I was halfway through my second term, and the home builders were saying, Mr. Mayor, our building season's really short in Northern Ontario. The sooner we can get in the ground, we can build more units. But if we're not getting approvals till June, July, and August, we just can't get going. And I said, well, what's the holdup? And they said, well, we try to get on the agenda of council, and it's a committee of council, as you know, because all development gets referred to committee. And what would happen is staff would go to the clerk. The clerk would say, okay, the first time we can get anybody on committee is probably 6 months from now because council's really busy. And that's just a long-going tradition at the city, probably most cities. And when I heard that, I went and saw the clerk, and I went and saw the head building official, which was Bev Hillier at the time, and still is. I said, well, the mayor has the ability to call special meetings of council anytime. He can just within 24 hours set a meeting up. Now, usually I would do 48 hours, but what we put in place was when Bev had a subdivision ready to go or a housing plan ready to go, she would come and tell me, and she'd tell the clerk. I would go tell the clerk, hey, listen, I want to schedule a public meeting within 7 days. We'd schedule it. Council would hear it, say yay or nay, and then they would move it forward. Where in the past, and this isn't a fault of city staff or the private sector, it was just one of those things that was ongoing. We were able to bring the subdivisions and the housing plans forward, within a week of them being ready to go. Now, sometimes the private sector or the builders took a little bit longer than what we wanted, and sometimes I'm sure we took a little longer than they wanted, but it worked extremely well. So we sped up the process. Dave was part of the DART team, which a builder would come in and have everybody at the table. So it'd be M&R, building, economic development, planning, engineering, and the health unit, fire, police. Everybody would be at the table. And what you'd hear is, yep, that should all go through, but you have one or two issues here. So it allowed the home builder or the company that was building the homes to correct it before they got further down the process, and then all of a sudden the brakes came on. So, that DART committee and Dave really did DART point 2, really sped things up. And those were just simple little changes that cost absolutely nothing. But I was very fortunate that my previous council was, they were amazing because they never complained. I think if you were to look at the number of meetings we had over those 4 years, they had to be a record because I was calling a special meeting every time there was home builders ready to go.
Now, when you're talking about being well positioned for particular grants and funding and agreements with the province and the feds to get more homes on the go, one of the impediments, like the pandemic, sort of changed things. We have more pressure in North Bay, rise in costs because of that pressure, bidding for houses, as well as the fact that the interest rates now are kind of making it unlikely people are going to be investing in building stuff right now. So while we're well positioned, the factors and the economics are a detriment. The other thing is the landlords and tenants are really there's a problem with the landlord and tenants. There's a long wait for tribunals. A lot of people are getting out of the landlord business and we were talking yesterday, and this is one of the possible solutions, is the ability to have granny suites and whatnot. But what do you say to the fact that it's not exactly a time people want to be renting out?
So, first off, from the financial side, again, my experience, I've only experienced one planning staff, with respect to the city of North Bay, but my experience continually has been, planning has always been, staff has always been lockstep with council. And I guess I'm speaking about the last 4 years specifically. They heard what the mandate was of growth, and they pivoted a lot of things that were able to help us with that. One was the additional dwelling unit. So if in City of North Bay, if you're a residential homeowner, you can only have one unit on the property. Now, staff came up with this concept where, and it's not unique certainly to North Bay, but you can have now 2 additional units on that property. And, that's why this Housing Accelerator Fund, this federal fund, where the federal government has freed up $4 billion to municipalities that are ready to go, and I feel we are ready to go. If you want to put 2 additional units in your property, with this fund, $25,000 per unit is available, plus any other incentive that the city or DSAB might provide. These funds that are available from the federal government, it's very clear. One of the criteria, one of the things they say that they want municipalities to do is change current practices to ensure more housing units are being created.
Right.
And when I say we're well positioned, I think we're well positioned with our planning staff. I think we're well positioned with the reserve money that the DSAB's been able to accumulate. And we're well positioned with not just the work the last council did, but this council is also, realizes that affordable housing, new housing, we have to accelerate what we've done. As far as, wanting to be out of the business, well, I don't know. I understand that, but, maybe the municipality has to take more of a lead role. One of the things in the Housing Action Plan, it does mention city-owned land, a good chunk of it, where you could make available for housing. And Al, you know the chunk they're talking about. That's it's off of Metcalf Street. If I'm, you wouldn't know it, but Metcalf Street has been extended. It's not a serviced street right now. It's not being used, but the infrastructure's in there. That wasn't even.
I forget.
What's that?
Where's Metcalf? I forget.
You know where the Nipissing Serenity Hospice is?
Yes.
So the back of that is Metcalf Street.
Oh, okay.
So there's quite a sizable chunk of land there that the municipality, I know, has put in the Housing Action Plan that could be made available.
Al, are you familiar with I just want to go to that issue because I bumped into Anthony Koziel at the event at Memorial Gardens this weekend, and their landlord-tenant, North Bay Landlords group was meeting tomorrow. I was kind of hoping that it's a big issue for them as far as dealing with the situation with tenants that don't want to pay, don't want to move out, and the tribunal is not being in place to actually address those issues. What do you hear about that kind of thing?
Well, from experience, when I was 25, I decided I was going to be a landlord and bought a house that was a duplex, and I sold it when I was 26 because the rules were just stacked against the landlord. So I feel bad for the landlords.
So that was just a couple of years ago?
Yeah, that was before cars, I think.
I think it's worse now, almost, right? But it's always been.
I got out within a year just because of all the rules and regulations, and the rules are stacked against the landlords. So I feel bad for the landlords. And then, to ask landlords to build more units or investors to build more units, they are building them, but the rules are stacked. So I think if they could find a better balance between the tenants and the landlords, you're going to see more development in that sector. But it is brutally tough on the landlords. And I'm sure there's bad landlords out there too that good tenants have to deal with too. So just finding a better balance. To your previous question to Dave Mendocino, interest rates have gone up, but material costs have come down. So there is a bit of a balance there. The challenge, I think, for new builds is if you look at our real estate market now, in the last 8 months, so compare the 8 months of 2023, that's January to August, versus January to August in 2022, the average cost of a house or sale of a house has come down about 9%, which is really good news for families, first-time home buyers, young buyers. That is really good. The downside, obviously, if you've been owning a house for over that period of time, you've lost a whole lot of equity. Secondly, if you're going to build a new home, it costs more to build a new home than to buy a resale. So you can imagine if you're concerned about high interest rates and high labor rates and high whatever, it's going to be tough to buy a new house because it's cheaper to buy an existing house. Then the home builders don't have as many clients or customers, so they're not building houses. So it actually is a reverse circle of reducing the number of houses that are being built. So if you look at the stats in North Bay up to August 2023, there's only 26 homes been built, 26 single-family home builds. And I think we had 76 in the same period the year before. So it's really starting to bear out. And that's not placing the blame on council because council can only do so much. But council needs to take a leadership role and say, listen, we want every program that we can put in place to encourage building of homes, to getting extra funding from the province or the feds, how we can continue to reduce tape. That's council's role. The private sector's role is to actually build them, but they're not going to build them unless they can get a return. So you're not going to go to work at a bank if you don't get paid. You're not going to go work anywhere if you're not going to get paid. Same with these investors. They're not going to put all their money out and not get paid. So you have to find the sweet spot for everyone in that mix to create more housing. But, you know, when you look at East Ferris, they built 24 up to August 31st, and North Bay is only at 26. So why is that? So that's something that should be looked at. And I understand that development charges came back in. They didn't pass the moratorium. They just let it end. So when you desperately need housing, now you have development charges, which adds another $10,000, $15,000 on top of a house. So you can imagine the builder or the investor that's going to go build is now having to pay even more money, and it might be easier for the existing customers or families to buy that resale home. So that's not to point the finger at anybody, because everybody just needs to be part of the solution. But I think they really need to revisit that. And the housing action plan that's on the table right now, I mean, I do want to give a shout out to Dave Mendocino, who is the chair of Nipissing Housing Corp, and Tanya Raybosch. They really pushed for this last term, and now it's finally done. And you know, kudos to Ian and Bev and Adam and everyone that was involved in creating that plan. This plan is really, really good. This is going to make a difference. But it's really up to City Council to say we want housing and direct their staff to do everything possible to make that happen.
Now, about the moratorium on the development charges, I remember writing that perhaps it was lost opportunity for revenue for the city because during the big boom for the building, I don't think that was as big as a factor because the economics involved. And now we need the moratorium as an incentive. So the timing of that might have been skewed.
But I think, Dave, you know, in fairness to the council of the day, which I was part of, we wanted to send a message to our community, to our businesses, to our staff that we wanted growth, right?
Yeah.
And you want to provide programs where people will build, because our population was going down. If you remember, the biggest complaint was there was absolutely no jobs. You know, we were older population. We needed to turn that whole sentiment around. So you could make the argument for sure that, you know, we lost out on that 100,000 or 150,000 development charges. But the flip side is we had those home builders building homes on spec, which hadn't been done in years and years and years. And it was all of a sudden, everything went in the right direction. Now, could we have predicted the pandemic? Well, we knew one was coming. We just didn't know when. So but we were ready to go, right? So,
I mean, one of the things that factored into my decision at the time to put a moratorium on development fees is, again, when you're trying to build this, you know, we want to grow the city. You can't just use words. You got to put some action behind it. And when you looked at the outlying municipalities that were basically, no development fees, and they were building at a fairly rapid pace. At the very least, we wanted to, compete on a level playing field.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm just taking pot shots from the peanut gallery.
Of course.
Yeah, it's easy for me. I'm sitting in the background, right?
And you know what? I don't know if at some point, I don't know what direction this council is going to go with respect to development fees, but I know they are going through a review right now, which is mandatory every 5 years. So they are going to have some kind of discussion, I would think, about are we going to implement them? Are we going to increase them? Are we going to put another moratorium on it? Do we want to create development fees on their own? Are not going to are not the answer. But are we going to make waiving development fees part of the incentive so that we can really accelerate housing?
I think the next topic really will be about what kind of housing do we need? Apartments, social housing. What is the priority?
So that's another reason why I say we're well positioned now, because not only do we have surpluses with DSAB, you got the Housing Action Plan, but you've got DSAB now right in the middle. They've awarded the contract to do a housing needs study, and what's that going to do? It's going to identify what types of housing units are needed, not just for North Bay. DSAB is a regional entity, but those are the kinds of things that other levels of government, when they're providing funding, want to see. They want to see that you know what kind of housing is needed. Obviously, you don't need to do a housing needs study to know that we need more social housing. I mean, when there's a continual wait list of 200 plus for social housing. So, and again, I feel we're well positioned there. I mean, you've got 60 units that are ready for development on Brook Street. Up on Leonard Street, you have a developer that has 100 plus units approved that was approved last council. You've got another developer's got 70 units up on the hill. So again, the housing needs study is going to determine what kind of housing we need, but I think you can pretty well determine ahead of time that social housing is certainly number one.
Oh, skip the consultancy fees for that report, and I'll just send a memo to somebody if you want. Then just say, there we go, that's what we need.
There you go.
I made a text. I got a hold of Mark King. He's chair of DSAB again, and he's a tourist right now in Quebec, but and he said he was busy driving, so he couldn't call in. But he said between all the different factors, between interest rates, the problems with supply and builders, one of the disincentives for, or one of the challenges is lack of operating dollars once you do build them. Is that did I get that right off him? It was just a quick text, but he says once you build it, then it costs a lot of money to operate social housing, right? Is that an issue?
Well, it certainly costs money to run social housing, absolutely. But again, when you're looking at developing it, when you're looking at running it, this is why funding from other levels of government is so important. This is why having $6-7 million in reserve with DSAB is so important. You can't just you need to supplement sometimes the financial picture. I don't, I'm not. We run a DSAB, Nipissing District Housing Corp runs a lot of units. Are there issues? Yeah, but
are there funding issues?
Well, there's always there. I mean, you could always use more funding, but at the end of the day, we again get back to being well positioned. I think you've got the feds and the province now coming to the table. They're serious about developing affordable housing, and they're going to be looking for municipalities that are ready to go. And this has kind of been, a staple, I think, of the councils. The last council that I sat on was being ready to go. We realized that you need to do a certain amount of work in order to be ready to go, in order to have shovel-ready projects.
You were mentioning that there was a couple applications turned down. They were trying to do that for the federal funding that was available over the last 4 years. Like, it's not like they haven't been applying for funding to assist, right?
We've been over the last 4 years, we were very aggressive. We applied twice to the Rapid Housing Initiative, and I working lockstep with our MP and the MP for the Sturgeon, Mr. Sari, I believe.
Mark Sari.
Yeah.
Working with both, they really went to bat for us. But reality is, it wasn't really a significant amount of money that was available. And
not as significant as the $26 million we got for the community center, right?
Not as significant as that, no. But when you get, I mean, the larger municipalities, by the time they take their share, there's not much left. I'm encouraged by the amount they've allocated here, $4 billion federally, and I'm encouraged by the type of application we submitted because it's ticking all the boxes. We're well positioned.
Al, do you have any ideas that would help with any of these areas?
Well, it was a very good question, Dave, and I was listening to the response. What type of housing do we need? So I think what we have to clarify is what is the different types of housing, right? So if you look at all the blogs or social media, we need more affordable housing. But when it costs $400,000 minimum to build a house, everybody will say that's not affordable. Okay, so defined affordable. Dave?
Yeah.
Define affordable. What is affordable?
For I think there's different definitions for each of the stratospheres that we have in the community, right? So there's people that find a $700,000 home very affordable. Now, I would suspect that there's only a certain amount of things that you can have any power over to make something affordable. So
the point that I'm trying to make is we need to understand the different type of housing, right?
Yep.
So there's geared to income, there's social housing, there's affordable housing. Now that's, I think the definition, or I believed it was affordable, was I think the Canadian mortgage line is like 35% of your income, right? So if you're only making $50,000 a year, you know that you can really only afford a $200,000 home. Well, that's affordable to you, right? If you're making a little bit more, you might be able to afford a $300,000 home. The conversations that I had with the home builders was, I was hearing, we're an older community, right? The population's older in Northern Ontario. And the seniors were saying, Mr. Mayor, I just want 1,200, 1,500 square feet on one level with no stairs. They weren't talking about price. They were just talking smaller homes where they didn't have to look after the lawns and all that sort of thing. And when I asked the home builders why they weren't building them, they said, we can actually make more money selling the bigger homes for the demand that was out there. Now, that sounds kind of self-serving, but it's like if you're an employee, you just want as much money as you can when you're working.
That's
right?
the marketplace. Yeah.
It's the marketplace. So I think the answer to your question is we absolutely need more social housing. We need more geared to income housing. We need more housing. So the more housing stock there is, the more affordable it gets, right? Because if there's more homes for sale, there's usually more room to negotiate the price down. The challenge for geared to income or social housing that Dave's mentioning, I think if I can just kind of simplify it, if you bought a $300,000 house and your mortgage is $2,000 a month, right? That's interest and principal, insurance and taxes. And somebody that's in geared to income housing, they're only paying $200. Now the housing might not be quite the same comparison, but that's a loss leader. So it's costing the taxpayer, whoever that might be, through DSABs, which is municipal, through province or the feds. You know, probably the going price for that size of unit is maybe $1,500 a month. But if you're only paying $200, someone is financing the difference between the two, which means that it has to come through taxes, right? So that's why in our country, our tax level is kind of high because there is quite a bit of housing. In the city of North Bay, we absolutely need housing from all different sectors, from geared to income right to the large housing. And if you remember, and I think you were a reporter at the Nugget at the time, the big issue that I inherited when I became the mayor was student housing up in Thibault Terrace, right? The community was mad that all the students were up there. Now they're mad because there's no housing for students. So what's old becomes new, and what is new becomes old. And I think this is just really a reflection of our society. And, you know, to every councillor, every mayor that's serving in this country, I take my hat off to them. I don't criticize them because I know how tough it really is. And I think, you know, if we're looking at the student housing from 8 years ago to now, I think our community recognizes that Canada and Nipissing are economic drivers, and they can't bring any more students in because there's no housing. Well, there's no even housing for our citizens. So I think there really needs to be a very strong push, and I would like to hear from our council and our mayor that they're going to build more and more homes. And I think they want that. It's just we need to communicate that louder and louder so our community can get behind it, our staff can get behind it. But this action plan that, as I mentioned, was Dave and Tanya really pushing for it last term is excellent, and I hope they carry through with it.
And I think getting just to add to those comments, again, I keep on getting back to we are well positioned. There's been a lot of work that's been done over the last few years to put us in a good position to build and take advantage of this federal and provincial funding. And I'm excited that, I'm feeling very hopeful that we're going to be successful with this Housing Accelerator Fund. And it's going to be exciting because this council is going to be in a position where they can start executing a lot of this stuff. And I believe that we all know, this council certainly knows, this current council, it hasn't changed. Affordable housing is needed. The more we can accelerate that process, I think that's what this council is going to be looking at.
Does this community need a tiny homes, a development where it's the bare minimum, it's basically safe shelter? Will that help, or is there enough going on in helping the people that are unhoused? I know that we have some programs in transitionary housing and services. Maybe touch upon that. Are we making any headway as far as the unhoused?
Well, the messages I keep on hearing from the feds and the province is make your planning policies adaptable. Be able to pivot if you see an opportunity. There's no reason why, again, in the Housing Cities Action Plan, it speaks to a chunk of land that the city owns that could be used to develop. Mm-hmm. Why couldn't you look at adapting, changing planning policies where you could put, I don't know how many tiny homes in that area? It would be perfect. We've seen these homes. It's not like you're providing shelter, mm-hmm. probably only for two people, but still, you can probably build, you can build a lot more tiny homes than you could if you just went normal home.
Well, it's either that or apartment type complexes, I guess, or I don't know what the most efficient way to spend that money is.
Why couldn't you do both?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, we need everything, really. We need more of everything. So that's the simple answer to everything, is that we need more homes in every level so that we just drive down a little bit the costs as far as people being able to afford them.
So you got a couple maybe with one child that is renting an apartment. They're on social assistance. Mm-hmm. Think about how their lives might be able to change if they were able to have some kind of ownership of a tiny home. Somehow structure it financially, where they could take some ownership of it, and maybe that helps them along the way. I don't know. Similar
to the Habitat for Humanity programs, where they try to get people in that need a helping hand up into it, and then they end up eventually being able to take charge of that. I know that there's a big development they're looking at for Warren. I'm not sure if you saw that in the news, but they consider themselves a place where, in between North Bay and Sudbury, where they could do something on a bigger scale for that, to put people, young families that can't really afford their own home, mm-hmm. but give them a spot to try.
I think on the tiny homes, Dave, it has been tried, by the way, and I'm not saying that it'll work or not work, but I know Kingston tried it and they actually got out of it. If you look at good planning practices, and I'm not a planner, so I apologize, Bev or Ian, if I get something a little wrong here, but good planning means you do social housing, normal housing, geared to income housing, bigger houses, all in the same neighborhood. You just don't want one group or one sector in an area. So if you look in, the inner cities of the large cities, they've created social housing projects that, have created challenges when it comes to crime and poverty, where good planning is you want to separate it. So if you look at the city of North Bay, for an example, we have 27 food banks. Did you know that? 27 food banks in the city of North Bay. And the one thing that the Gathering Place does very well is they encourage everybody to come and have dinner. So if you want to come and have lunch, Dave, you're welcome to go to the Gathering Place. Now, you have to pay $10 to sit there and have lunch, but you destigmify the process by having individuals. And it's the same way with housing. So, instead of, just picking one area and putting all the social housing there, we have to be careful in good planning practices to split it all up. So there should be different makes and different sectors throughout our whole community. So it kind of evens it out a little bit than picking just socialized housing in one little area. And in my experience as mayor, and Dave has probably experienced this too, the most controversial thing we always had to deal with at council was housing. Every time we wanted to build 5 houses, they would pack the council chambers. And there was 5 acronyms, and I'm going to miss a couple, but there was NIMBY, which you know, not my backyard. There was banana, build absolutely nothing near anything else. There was a number of them. So I think what we have to do as society is realize that, you know, we need housing, and that means having a house beside us or above us. And we need to intensify the amount of housing in a small area. So I mean, we have to build up. And North Bay is traditionally built out. We need to build up. But trying to build a condo complex or a multi-res, the sheer regulations that go into building that almost make it unaffordable to do it. And that's why virtually no multi-res has been built in the last 15 years. It's just way too expensive.
Overregulated, do you think?
Yeah, I
Are
think
the codes just too stringent?
codes, Terry warranties, it goes on and on and on. So, you know, the fact that we need housing and no one's built a big apartment building kind of tells you, you know, just from experience that even the investors who, you know, will invest if they think they can get a return aren't even building them for whatever reason. And I'm not an expert. I think your podcast, you know, you really need to hear from the planners and the investors and the home builders and the developers what it would take to build more houses, because sometimes we're sitting around having this conversation and they're the experts.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, when you talk just
That's a
real
good point.
quick, this housing accelerator fund that the city has applied to, there's a reason why there. If you look at additional dwelling units, what's the quickest way to develop units in the city? Well, you could take the time. You certainly build it. You got to go through the planning process, development process. With additional dwelling units, the structure is right there. If the services are all there, if you're looking at developing, accelerating your housing, and the number of housing units you develop, that could be one of the quickest ways. If 0.5 of the individuals that own single-family dwellings, 0.5 developed one unit, that would be 62 units a year. And I think that's why the city has made additional dwelling units one of the areas to provide incentive, $25,000 per unit if you want to develop it, because I think they see that as a quick way to start addressing and accelerate your housing supply.
Well, that's a good point. I think the impediment to that is, and actually I see a cultural shift that is going to come into for the third generation Canadians that don't live together as a family very much because we're all spread out. We all need our own home and nobody else allowed to live with us. I think the economies are going to sort of change our tune on that, and we'll maybe build these for the real granny suites for our real grandmas and grandpas, right? But I do think that one of the keys to making that so that people want to do the extra units in their houses and get into the landlord game, they need to immediately address the problem with the tribunals so that when you're a landlord, you can't get stuck for 8, 10, 12 months without getting rent and the guy doesn't have to leave. That has to be solved, while protecting the rights of the tenants as well. But you can't have that. It has to be a 3-month process, tops, right? So I think that's one of the major things, because I wouldn't want to get into the landlord game.
Yeah, and certainly that was, I think we all agree there. I mean, it needs to be more, as Al said, it needs to be more balanced.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the city, correct me if I'm wrong, the city has nothing to do with
that's a provincial thing for sure.
Right. So, I mean, I think the city is doing what we can when it comes to housing. The other thing affordable dwelling units does is it makes owning a home more affordable. Like if you're a young couple and you haven't been able to get into the housing market, even in North Bay, because you can't afford $400,000 or $350,000, whatever the number is, now that you can do this, build 2 additional units, that could help, some people that maybe could not get into the market now that they have that extra income and they have, $25,000 per unit to help with the cost to renovate. That'll also help that as well, I believe.
I always learned everything's not black and white, although we want it to be black and white. I don't know how many legal apartments are in the city of North Bay, but it's significant and always has been. And the city's never really cracked down on them because then there'd be no place for anybody to live, right? So it was kind of a catch-22. So unless there was a complaint, it kind of has always been there. I think with this new program, and I think we have to look at it, is, if you're going to get an extra $25,000 for your apartment that upstairs, but it's always been there, and you're now going to get $25,000 and you license it, have you created any more space? It could just be that people are taking their house now, they have an illegal apartment, making it legal and collecting the money, and you haven't created any new spots. The other piece that I read an article on, and I know we're running out of time, so I'll be really quick. The little houses or tiny houses that the province said, you can go ahead and build them, which I think is great, by the way. I thought that was good policy. From what I'm reading is there's very little uptake because nobody wants somebody living in their backyard, in reality. So I think the provincial government's doing everything that they can to help build housing, and I applaud them. But it's not simple and it's not black and white. There is so much to it, but you need to bring everybody together.
Absolutely.
Well, that was a good discussion, guys. I really appreciate that. We didn't solve a damn thing, but it actually put some, highlight on some of the issues. If you have an idea or a solution or want to highlight part of the problem, let me know. Send an email to Dave at northbayecho.ca. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Dave.
My pleasure. That was fun.
Cool. Right on.